I'm sorry. What? Is this real? Is my G5 like a time machine now? What's going on here? Okay, accept. I mean, you should use a Mac Mini, but since you tried to run OS 10 on that Dell, use Lion. What about Snow Leopard? What about it? Lion is the latest version. Now he wants to screen share? Okay. Okay, now this is crazy. So it looks like we can make a Hackintosh, but it has to be Steve approved. The last time we tried to Hackintosh this OptiPlex here, it kind of worked, but not in the way that I anticipated. Now, I'm not going to say too much because in the first video we did about this, it was the first ever attempt that I made at actually trying to Hackintosh the system. So if you want to check that out, I'll have it linked available here and in the description below. But basically, let's just say that I tried to install macOS Mavericks. I guess you can say it worked, but that is kind of being a little generous. It did install, but it was at least a good learning experience, and the hard drive has now been reset, and I've been pretty busy doing some more research about older macOS Hackintoshing. Now, I will say that we installed a dedicated GPU, the GT730, inside this desktop here, and Mavericks just did not like it at all. However, as Steve himself said, we should probably try out another version of macOS. The OptiPlex is ready to be Hackintoshed once again. We have everything set up. We have the installer drive ready to go. As you can see, I've been pretty busy here with myHack, and we have a variety of different installers now. Now, the reason why I'm continuing to use myHack is because it's just awesome. It's old macOS Hackintosh software, but it continues to work to this day. Yes, things have progressed since 2013. We have open core, we have modern alternatives, but you know what? This just works, and it's not like this is my main Macintosh system. Even if it's not 100% a Macintosh, I mean, it's a Hackintosh, so it's not going to be perfect. And the crazy part about myHack is that this was around when 10.7, 10.8, 10.9, all of these versions were still the latest and up to date. Like, it's actually crazy to think how plug and play of a solution this is. This is kind of like the opposite of Apple's Boot Camp. So instead of installing Windows on macOS, you're installing macOS on a Windows machine. We have Lion, Mountain Lion, Mavericks, and of course, the ultimate version install disk. Who can forget about that release of macOS? Such a legendary version. Now, during my research about old Mac apps, myHack, Hackintoshing, I found out that the latest version of myHack actually has an issue with Snow Leopard. So I found an older version of myHack based on old information from around the same time period. It seems like 3.1.2 is actually the ideal version to use for Snow Leopard. So I used my physical copy here, and that's why we have this one right here. Now, when it comes to the partition order, that's just kind of how it ended up. I did not expect for myHack to fail with this, at least the latest version. I know it's not perfect, but I'm probably going to have to rewrite over this installer anyways. But for the purpose of today's video, it'll get the job done. Now, I still have 10.9.5, even though it doesn't work on this system properly with the GPU. Now, it probably would make sense to install Snow Leopard or even Mountain Lion. I'm probably going to end up installing Lion because that's what Steve told me to do, and it actually works better than you would think. And to start this off, we're going to begin with Snow Leopard. So we just need to go into Install Disk. Now, we do have an Apple logo, but the important thing is to see if it actually stays on screen. Now, that is fantastic to see. Of course, keeping the G5 within frame here. Now we can actually see what's on screen. And again, this is with the GPU, so it means that we're off to a better start compared to Mavericks. So we have the awesome Snow Leopard design here, and if we go into Utilities, and we go into System Profiler, now this is the most important thing that I want to see. What does it actually show under Graphics? So we do have just GPU, like that's all it says. It does report it with an X16 connection here, but the problem is that we only have 32 megabytes of VRAM detected. Now this GPU has 2 gigabytes of VRAM, so seeing it go from 2 gigabytes to 32 megabytes, yeah, that's not super ideal. Ironically though, even with this low amount of VRAM, this is still better than what was reported within Mavericks. You know what? We should probably double check Mountain Lion first to see if it actually loads, so we can save the best for last. Yes, that was kind of a joke. I know Lion is not exactly regarded as the best version, but it is the version that Steve told us we should use. Off to a good start. Now this looks even better than Snow Leopard. Already I can tell that we have higher resolutions available. Now I know it's not like the ultimate Dell display, but it still has a decent picture, and I can tell that it is actually making use of the GPU. And I think at this point they changed it to system information, and it's actually not here. So opening up terminal here, we can just check it within system profiler, at least the command itself. And here we have the generic NVIDIA chip model name. So even though we don't have the GT730 directly listed, it does actually report the full 2 GB of VRAM, which is fantastic. So I would say that Mountain Lion successfully reports the GPU here, but now let's go into Lion. So far we're 3 for 3. Snow Leopard, Mountain Lion, and Lion actually show an Apple logo with the GPU. Now this looks pretty much identical to Mountain Lion, but within utilities we do actually have system information. It's essentially the same as Mountain Lion. So we have the generic NVIDIA chip model name. It is reporting it at x16 speeds, and we have the full 2 GB of VRAM. So despite having both of these, with one of them being the better option, I'm still going to install Lion because I can. Also, Steve told me to install this, so I kind of don't have a choice. But honestly, the other reason is because my Mac Pro is using Lion, and I want to make use of the server application that was first introduced on macOS Lion. But I think it's a cool spot where it's just new enough to have some extra features, but it's old enough to also support some legacy hardware. Now when it comes to macOS server, we can spend a lot of time talking about that, but we kind of have to have a macOS version in the first place. So let's go ahead and install Lion so we can make Steve proud. Even though the hard drive is empty, it's still a good idea to go into disk utility, because unless we want to install this with the drive actually just being called untitled, I think we should change this. OptiPlex Lion server. It's pretty self-explanatory. We have an OptiPlex running Lion, and it's going to be acting like a server. And even with standard mechanical hard drives, disk utility is still really fast. As you saw, it completed instantly. What's funny about this is that I've installed old macOS so often at this point that this is not like nostalgic or even that interesting, because this is just another day in the office basically. Oh, what's that? Skeuomorphic design? I see that all the time. When I think of a Hackintosh, it's usually this thing right here because I just use old macOS so often. What do you mean 10.7 Lion is ancient? It just works. Of course, we read the entire thing. macOS 10 will be installed on the OptiPlex Lion server disk. To change the items you want to install, click Customize. There's nothing to customize. This is actually the first time I'm looking at the customize options here, and I can only assume that this is probably from myHack actually creating the installer. And just like that, our Hackintosh is soon to be a Macintosh. Just like with any other myHack installer, we have some extra things at the end here. First off, we have a generic extras folder that comes either pre-installed, or if you're doing an upgrade here, you can actually select one. But in this case, as it's a fresh install, we just select the first option here. We have awesome notifications up here, and all of these kernel extensions, you typically want to remove these. There's probably very few exceptions where you'd want to keep these. myHack itself strongly recommends that we remove these. So we have a nice green check mark here to indicate that it was successful. And we need to make sure that this is actually on the internal hard drive, not the installer again. Now this is a certified Steve Jobs moment. Like it or not, we have Lion. I know I said that old macOS is basically just normal for me now, but it is still really cool to see these classic installers. And of course we have a genuine Apple keyboard. And as for the internet, we need to install the Ethernet kernel extension drivers once we're at the desktop. We also need to apply sound drivers once we're at the desktop at the same time. But apart from that, everything else is mostly operational as you would expect, like on a normal Mac. Don't transfer anything for now. And for this, we could just do Command Q, and we will call this OptiPlex 780. And it's that easy. You just click on this and you magically get brought to the desktop. It's always nice to see these older designs, especially when it comes to iOS, but again, just like old macOS, I see these icons pretty regularly because I also have a lot of old iOS devices. The first thing I will do though is go into Finder Preferences, enable these, and I will also go into View Options, enable Snap to Grid, and I also have to do that within the Finder itself. And now it actually resembles my Mac Pro. So here we have our kernel extension utility, and here we have Ethernet and audio. Wait for this to say that it's done. Restart the system. Ethernet is working. We can actually see the Mac Pro on the network. And you know, you kind of need Ethernet if you're going to use this as a server, so thankfully that works just fine. We do also have audio. Now, even though we will lose out on older iTunes, it's actually kind of a good thing that we're going to update this to 12.2.2 because this is actually the version that my main iTunes library is running on. The Mac Pro is completely up to date. It has my iTunes library and it's running on the latest that Lion officially supports. So if we actually have this on the same version, that means I can easily access the contents of my iTunes drive on this system. Now, I understand why later on they integrated software update within the App Store, so that way it would be easier to update both your apps and the OS version itself. The old App Store doesn't work anymore, yet software update continues to work just fine. In fact, it'll still work even with macOS Tiger. It just works. As you can see, we are downloading the updates just like a Hackintosh back in the day. Dude, you gotta restart your computer. This right here is awesome. Yeah, that's probably the first time you heard someone say that a software update is cool. Well, at least back in the day, they gave you this awesome background to look at. Just check out these awesome graphics. Launchpad opens up flawlessly. We have no problems in terms of actually keeping up with the display. We have high resolution icons. The picture is excellent. Clearly we have graphics that are actually working. Now this is exactly why I want to have a dedicated server setup, because I have the Mac Pro with all the files that I need with it right now, and I'm able to just drag and drop it to the desktop here. It's such an awesome solution, and that's kind of why I want to have one dedicated system for stuff like this. macOS itself is up to date, and before we take a look at the server applications here, even though we do have Safari 6, which is usable for like ancient websites or websites like Macintosh Garden, it's not really that helpful when it comes to the modern internet. Now, of course, there's ways you can bypass that, make proxies, you know, internet archive, stuff like that. But for general web browsing, it would help to have something actually up to date. This is macOS Lion. How in the world is that going to work? And to that I say, well, it just does. Now this right here is called Firefox Dynasty. It's an awesome project which brings modern Firefox to ancient macOS. So basically anything from 10.7 and up, it works without a problem. Now I will say that on 10.8 and up, it works flawlessly. On 10.7, you do need to configure it a bit in order for it to actually open up properly, but once you do that, it runs without any issues, and you can hardly tell that this is actually running on ancient hardware. Now previously it used to be another fix which I saw in a Mac Rumors forum, but another fix that I've seen recently is to actually open this up in safe mode, which you can do by holding down Option. Now if you don't do that, it'll just basically crash and it won't do anything. So going back to this, holding down Option, it'll ask us if we want to open this up in troubleshoot mode. It will actually open up and you can use it as it is. But if you want to stop the crashing on startup and you don't want to open it up in safe mode, so that way you can actually use extensions, you need to go into settings, go down to where it says performance, and remove this as well as hardware acceleration. We can quit Firefox, and if we open this up again, I don't know why it does this specifically on Lion. You shouldn't have to deselect this on Mountain Lion or newer. You do have to go to the GitHub page and manually get the new updates and drag the new version of Firefox into your applications folder. But apart from that, it's modern Firefox. We can easily go to YouTube. Now, of course, it still will be hardware dependent on how well it can actually play the video, but installing H.264 will help out with YouTube playback. It just makes it so that it'll play back the videos with the H.264 codec, which is a lot nicer to use on these older machines. Another issue I've discovered with Lion and modern Firefox is that even though the extensions will load, like H.264 is active. If I click on it, I can't really adjust anything because, well, the menu is invisible. I think this is only an issue on Lion though. So Ethernet works, the internet works. Now we just need macOS server itself. Now back in the day, you would usually get this server application through the App Store. The App Store doesn't work anymore, but fortunately, these do still exist. Now prior to Lion, such as with Snow Leopard, Leopard, Tiger, there was a retail copy and a server edition of macOS. With newer editions, starting with Lion though, you could actually make a retail copy into a server copy as long as you actually got this from the App Store. What's also really cool about this edition of server is that it has support for Intel era systems up to Lion, obviously, but you can even support things such as net booting systems with macOS 9. I know, it sounds pretty crazy. This is from 2011, but it still has some support for macOS 9. It also has other features, which I believe this was the last one to have, such as Xgrid. Xgrid itself just sounds awesome. You basically configure multiple systems to work with one another to act as one system. So if you have something to render or compile or whatever, you can use the power of multiple Macs as if it's one system. Now you could also do this in the PowerPC era, and I'm sure that it was even more awesome back then because, well, if you had multiple Macs to work with and you had the opportunity to Xgrid them together, that would have been really cool. So what we're going to do is we'll go into Applications, drag Server, and just like that, it's a server system. Now obviously there's still going to be some setup here, but we also need to install Server Admin Tools, which has features such as NetBoot. So let's open up Server. Just look at this graphical user interface. Now this is awesome. Server lets you enable useful collaboration services like file sharing, wiki server, iCal server, and more. Yeah, there's a lot that we can do with this. Use Server to empower your organization to do more with their Macs, iPhones, and iPads. This was also the first real server edition to have more support for iOS devices. Now, I don't know how often or if I can really make use of this in the first place, but it is still really cool to see. Dude, you got macOS server. Of course, we read the entire thing in reverse. That's how efficient we are. If you don't actually have a password on your user account, it will not continue. Just look at all the icons. It's fantastic. And I might actually make a backup of this version with it downloaded and installed, all the software that it needs, so that way we have the copy that we transferred onto this system, but we'll also have a fresh copy before we configure anything. Now that is a great indicator to tell you that it's done. So even though it is copied over, it still wants us to install software. Yeah, it looks like it is acting as if it's a fresh install, so I guess now we know. And here it is. macOS server. Now this is the last version, 1.5.0, and as you can see, I mean, it just goes really well with Lion. There's so many cool things here. File sharing, iCal, iChat. Now I know you can do some of these things within macOS as a default, like the file sharing aspect, but there's just a lot of cool extras here, and you can even do additional features with servers that are actually connected to the main system. I mean, there's a dedicated podcast section. How cool is that? Now we just need to install the admin tools and we'll have all the extras alongside server. So here we have Podcast Composer, Server Admin, Server Monitor, System Image Utility, Workgroup Manager, and Xgrid Admin. Now this was actually a free install from back in the day, so you did not have to purchase this, but it's not really that useful unless you have server itself. And all of these awesome features only occupied 204 megabytes. And there's that green check mark again. Fantastic. So now if we go into Launchpad, you can see we have an extra folder here. So here we have all of these utilities. System Image Utility is actually really cool because that's part of NetBoot functionality. I know a little bit about the server app here because I did some research about it. There's still a lot that I have to learn about this system. I mean, look at this. You can actually choose the system that it's installed on natively, or you can actually connect to another Mac. So if I had server installed and set up on the Mac Pro, I could access it from this system right here. And within the server pane here, I'll probably add other users such as the Power Mac, the Mac Pro, any other Mac system that I may want to connect to this. So this means that instead of having to go into Finder, go to Network, and manually just connect it with this here, I mean, it does get the job done, but this just makes it a lot more convenient, a lot easier to access, and you can actually even mount files on startup. So that way, if you want to access the server itself, you just have to set it up on the other system where you go into system preferences. You just have to add whatever folder you want to have auto mounted. It's all super cool. It's hard to believe that this is, you know, ancient in comparison to what we have, and it's kind of sad to see that server doesn't really exist anymore, but at least we have it right here. It still works. I mean, there's like even a dedicated web server, there's a wiki. You can even see statistics about like the actual CPU usage of your system or another user on the system. You could actually make this the main destination for Time Machine. Maybe we could actually install an additional hard drive within the system. With the new user section here, we can actually set up the Mac Pro, like I said, as a user on this system. So that way, if we want to log in, we don't have to use the credentials of the OptiPlex. We can actually use the Mac Pro login. We just have to set it up the way we want it to actually work in the first place. And just like that, the Mac Pro is ready to use the network here. Now, there's a lot of cool features and even kind of like a built-in tutorial down at the bottom here. But basically, you can configure the network, you can add users, it tells you what to do, how to do it in the first place. You can start the services here, and what I really love about the GUI is that you just have this gigantic switch here, which reminds me of iOS 4. So basically, if you want to turn on file sharing, the service is now active, and you can even tell that it's active because we have a green dot on the side. Now, I'm going to do some of this off camera. It's going to take a while for me to actually learn more about server, but you get the idea. This is awesome. And in fact, we could go back to the Mac Pro again just to see how the login works. So here we have the OptiPlex. Right now it's just connected as a guest. The reason why it shows up as an iMac is because myHack does that. It's how it configures the system. But instead of using the OptiPlex credentials here, we can actually use the Mac Pro name. And as you can see, we are connected as Mac Pro, not OptiPlex. The other cool part about this is that this groups folder is actually configured alongside the server groups section. So we could make like a generic workgroup server where it has generic permissions, or we can make specific ones such as a PowerPC group, an Intel workgroup. But there's a lot of potential here. In something like the users folder, if you go here, you can see that everything here is actually not accessible from the Mac Pro login. There's a lot of customization when it comes to setting read and write permissions, things like that. Now, I'm not exactly sure how I'd want to configure this yet, but like I said, a lot of potential here, and I can't wait to use this more. So if I want to have something like groups as part of the login items, all I have to do is click on this, go to the OptiPlex server, select groups, and click on add. And just like that, the volume will be auto-mounted on startup. Now we're just getting started with server here. I feel like I'm not fully representing the capabilities of this app because, well, I kind of need to use it more myself. The cool part about this is because as YouTube was around when this was being used, there's a lot of cool detailed tutorials from back in the day on how to use this. Now, of course, there's also websites and manuals and things like that, but I'm just saying that even though this is old and outdated, there's still a lot of resources out there to help you in how to actually make use of this. Just like with the old Hackintosh and myHack itself. Even though it's an ancient application compared to the modern solutions we have nowadays, there's still a lot of information about it, and you can just as easily set it up as if it was 2013 again. With that, I think we're at a good spot to wrap up today's video. The Hackintosh is a Macintosh, server is installed, and we have so much cool progress ahead of us because we have to set up both the hardware and software side of things. If you enjoyed today's video, then consider leaving a thumbs up. And if you want to see even more awesome server content, then consider subscribing. But as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.